host, Sean Lynn, in the pub for a Dram with friends, where we talk about faith, family, food, and fun. Pull up a chair and I'll pour you a drink. Episode 86. We are extremely blessed to welcome Samuel Blair, a Navy SEAL who talks about the importance of brotherhood. Sit back as I pour us a dram.
How's the morning going?
I can't complain. If you were here, what would I pour you?
You know what? I'd ask you whatever you got, man. Whatever. What are you drinking right there?
This is Highland Park Magnus. So it's a more reasonably priced Highland Park, but still quite tasty. So it's a Scotch. So I have a lot of options for you. So whatever, if you're a bourbon guy, Irish whiskey, Scotch. So
awesome, man. Well, so is this where are you at? This
is my basement pub. So we started to develop it a while ago, and then COVID hit, and I needed a place to work from, and our daughter was turning 18, and that's the legal age here in Alberta to have your first drink, and normally we take our kids out for their first drink, so we brought her to the pub here and had everybody zoom in so that they could join her for her first drink.
Awesome.
So, how about you? You're in Texas, right?
I'm just next to Texas in Covington, Louisiana. So just
okay.
Land, yeah.
Is that on the Shreveport Road or the New Orleans?
Yeah, it's further to Mississippi. So we're just north of New Orleans.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was through there a couple of years ago. Drove from Atlanta to Waco, so
okay, yeah.
Went through Shreveport on the way. Yep. Stopped, played a little disc golf, and
nice.
Give the legs a stretch.
There you go. Disc golf.
So
is
fun. Do you prefer Samuel or Sam or?
Sam is great. Yeah, I go by Sam usually with friends.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell people in the pub, our friends, that who is Sam Blair?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm an American, married to a beautiful woman, and we have 3 wonderful children, 2 boys, 1 girl. So, child of God, husband, and a father. And I'd also like to consider myself a brother. I've got a lot of good buddies, a lot of those men and women I served with in the military, but also siblings I'm close with. And just on a pilgrimage like everyone else, trying to do my best to pursue virtue and lead a quiet, hidden life. And yeah.
You bring up a great point in why it's so important for ministry to men is that brotherhood, that because we're in this together, right? And having a brother at your side or at your back. And I know in your former occupation that was so important. Having trusting and knowing the brother next to you, right?
Oh yeah, huge. And I think sometimes it's not even about knowing them well. One thing I like to talk about is night dives. You're not talking to the guy next to you, but every dive you have a swim buddy, and these are long, cold, dark dives. And just the consolation knowing that you've got a buddy on your right, or I guess left, depending on where you are, and the dive is huge. I mean, you're not saying anything, you're not sharing anything, but it's just a huge consolation knowing you're sharing that adversity, pain with someone else. but they also are there in case something goes wrong. And sometimes with close brothers, you don't even need to voice things. It's just knowing they're there and they've got your back and they're in your corner. That's good on the heart.
Well, I just finished 33 and a half years of policing here in Calgary, and yeah, when there's that code or rule or whatever you want to call it, that when things get bad, there's that thin blue line, we call it up here, or I know down there as well. Like you're in this together, no matter whether you love or hate the guy next to you. You have a common goal, right?
Yeah, that's right. And congrats, 33 years. How does that feel to be with that in the rearview mirror? It's a lot of police.
It's funny. So we God Squad Canada was started by 4 police officers seeing the need of strong fathers and husbands as a result of what we were seeing on the street and the young people we were dealing with. And we just had a conference this weekend in Cranbrook, a small one, but 3 of the original founders were there speaking to the men and just reminiscing with Jim was all too ready to retell all the stories. And it's funny because Jim and I were partners for 6 years downtown and did lots of exciting things. But I'm so excited about the new direction that God has blessed me to go and take what I've learned and reach out to men across Canada for me, but encourage those south of the border with the God Squad and the Catholic Men's Leadership Alliance. So I'm very blessed. How have you been able to translate your time as a Navy SEAL into back on home soil, as it were?
Yeah, I'm starting to wrestle with that. I don't think that it's a crazy jump. I mean, there's so many things that are applicable. I'm just trying to realize, okay, what I've learned, how that gets applied, and also like how that can benefit my family life, community life. There's so many things that I'm sure with policing, it's the same thing where, how you do, like mindset, how you deal with things, how you overcome challenges, how you work together, also how you've overcome obstacles and how that also translates into overcoming obstacles, whether it's a business or working in ministry. There's a lot that of overlap. And I'm also seeing stuff that, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Sean, things that I see as common sense approaches or things that maybe didn't necessarily faze me. It's not necessarily the case outside of the military. You see people getting riled up about things. They're like, well, there's no need to get riled up about that. Again, I'm not wearing their shoes, but it's like, it's not a stressor. And then there's things that I'm like, you should be losing your mind about this, and they're like, don't care. I'm like, no, those are the things you need to care about, So just trying to articulate that, and also trying to figure out what the medium is for that communication.
Well, and part of it is that distraction. We are battling forces of good and evil that a lot of people don't even see that as a reality, when you probably have experience with coming up against evil, as I have in my job over the years, and it is a reality, and there are choices that people make, and they're not even seeing it. That's where I guess the frustration is those choices that we're freely given each and every day to choose the good and the beautiful of the church and our wife and our kids. And it's hard. And it's hard sometimes not bringing it back into the home, where you have to build up those those walls, which are necessary. Like I telling a parents that their baby died of SIDS, and your wife's 8.5 months pregnant, you're not going to go home and talk to her about that call, right? You're not going to bring that one home.
Yeah.
And that's where the importance of having brothers to help you work through that stuff.
You need that pressure release valve. At the same time, you want to be prudent about what you share, what you don't. And then there's also things that I think translate, like, policing, military, things that go back to like the Romans, just this idea of isolation, containment. Like if you're going to go knock on a door, you want to make sure, hey, let's keep the bystanders out. Let's make sure we're controlling the scene so it's on our terms. And that's the same, in the military. But you realize on the flip side of that, being outside the military, like, oh, wow, that's also how the enemy works too, and tries to isolate and contain men. And so they realize to try and think, hey, you don't have brothers, there's no one coming to help you, you're alone in this. And you see more and more of that. It's like, whoa, that's false. And trying to wake men up to the reality that, hey, you're not isolated, you're not contained. In fact, like and if you are, you're oftentimes doing this through your own actions and your agency. And so you can also bust out of that. And one of those areas to bust out is with brothers. And to make sure you're not isolated and contained. And that you are being the man that God's calling you to be, in the home, for your neighbors, for your community, etc.
I really like that. That's excellent. We Dan Donaldson and myself presented to the Western Catholic Canadian bishops, and one of them asked, "Why do you think this ministry to men is so important?" And Dan said, "Because men are lonely." And there was a voice at the back of the room that said, "And bishops too." So it doesn't matter what walk of life you're in, that loneliness, that isolation that the enemy tries to instill in us, that nobody's coming to our help. When I'm sure you kicked down a door or two in your career, and that's a good feeling when you're coming to somebody's aid. When that's just an obstacle that you can go through, right?
Yeah, and I think you're also on something with the bishops and the clergy. I've heard it said through clergy that are also trying to wake their brothers up too. For the last couple of years in seminary, they've been told, hey, don't make friends, don't touch anyone, don't give hugs, don't give handshakes because of all the scandals. And so now, these priests that get out of seminary, they're no longer with their brothers, are living isolated in a parish. And they're being told, hey, don't get too close to people because, a scandal might happen. And that's not human. It's like they need human interaction, And so they're lonely. You've got men in the laity and in the pews, they're lonely. And I think this whole understanding of to marshal together, that's really where it gets dangerous. Like if you have men that are aligned and moving out on their call to be excellent husbands and fathers, and in the city square sharing and living out truth, understanding that they're sons of the triune God. I mean, of course the enemy wants to isolate and contain you, because that's not something that the enemy wants to bump up against. They want to bind the strong man so that all this nonsense can happen. It's like, well, the counter to that is men marshaling forward, and that changes the chessboard.
Well, and it's been on my heart to especially reach out to our priests and bishops, because they do need the support. I wrote an article a number of years ago. There was a movie called Passchendaele, which was based on the First World War, Canadian Army kind of thing, where this small group was caught in foxholes because everybody had fallen back. So they're up against the German army, and there's just a small number of them. And I likened it to that's how our bishops and priests they don't know where the shots are coming from. And they're just trying to hold on for dear life. And if we marshaled an army to come and behind them and relieve them or stand with them, that they'd have a lot more confidence to speak boldly on the gospel and where we need to go.
Yeah. 'Cause to that point, Sean, I think a lot of times as the church we take that defensive mindset, like, oh, well, close the gates, get back. It's good, true, and beautiful here, and let's keep the world out. And Christ was really clear, like, go out and make disciples. And the church is offensive by nature, and that conversion is going out. And but yeah, I think that mindset can't happen unless there's some clarity and there's people that are willing to actually do that work and have that formation to go forth and to preach the good news. First, you have to understand the good news. That good news has to change your life, transform you, and continue to transform you. And by doing that, you have to stay close to the sacraments. You actually have to have a relationship with Christ, and then from there you can go forward. Because I think without that, it's just you've got a bunch of people that are glorified social workers. It's just spinning.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. But I also, to encourage men that you don't have to be a theologian
No.
or a priest or somebody in order to engage in those conversations. Jeff Cavins, we were doing motorcycle rides and just talking to people right on the street and emboldening each other as brothers to share that gospel. And I think that's where part of his inspiration to write The Activated Disciple came from. You just stick to the basic message. We don't have to give years of theology to invite somebody to join us in the church.
Right, and I think you're spot on. But they're going to see a man or a woman, that's fully alive, and that's gonna say a lot, And that transformation happens by having that relationship with Christ. And you're right; they don't have to be a theologian or a philosopher, but they do have to encounter the living God, and that'll change everything.
And I'm sure you're able to correlate much of the work you did as a Navy SEAL into working together to inspire men on the weekend. I don't know your exact age group. Do you remember the Red Mile up here in Calgary? 2004, Calgary was going for the Stanley Cup, and the crowds just kept growing and growing to the point where we had between 60 and 80,000 people on the street. And I was the sergeant of our kitted riot squad, or whatever you want to call it. We called it public safety unit. And I was telling the men on the weekend that 20 men working together had no issue in going in and completing their task against 80,000, because we were coordinated, working together. We were going to complete our task, right? Mainly probably a medical or saving an officer caught in the crowd. We would complete our goal. We would move 80,000 with 20 guys working together. And that really resonated with the guys this weekend.
Yeah, it's a powerful image too. I mean, but it's I think it's a reality. I've never had that experience. With 20 versus 80,000, but just a take here. My son is real into flying, and so he's 9, my oldest, and we've been watching these old reruns of Dogfights, which is a History Channel episode, and they'll show different flights and combat. And one particular episode that I really love is it highlights the Korean War. There's a couple episodes on it, and it'd be 4 F-80 Sabres against 50 MiG-21s. You're like, what are you doing? Like, those odds are insane. But the four realized that there could only be one person on their tail at any given time. So as long as they're coordinated and working together, they had a shot. And every time, like, these guys would always just go right into the fray. I was like, man, that is, I don't know, it was something that really impressed me and like sparked something in my heart. I was like, ooh. And they'd come out the other side, but they realized something similar to you is like, hey, as long as we're working together, as long as we're keeping each other on our, in coordinated effort, and we're supporting one another, we're going to be all right. Because there can only be one bad guy on our tail at any given point. And so they figured it out and they went for it. I was like, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it's inspiring for men, and that's where I've talked at National Youth at Risk conferences and stuff like that down in Savannah, and I pointed out to the group there that it can start with as few as one. Like, you look at the life of Mother Teresa, you look at the life of Pope John Paul II, and like, they had every excuse to stop along the way. Like,
sure.
Pope John Paul II lost his mother, his brother, and his father by the age of 22. He was alone. The Nazis had taken over his country. Like, he could have quit 1,000 times, but he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too, if you just highlighting both the saints you brought up, starting with JP2, all of that pain, suffering that he experienced, like you're saying, he could have just folded, or in this case, he became a champion, understanding and empathizing with the people. I understand what you're going through. And then the Lord used all of that experience to really, yes, the rosary, maybe throw Ronald Reagan in there, but JP2 really brought down the Berlin Wall, and it was just this straight force of will, prayer, and unrelenting surrender to Our Lady in that situation. But that whole thing that you highlighted, yeah, he could have just imposed like, oh well, my life, I've encountered a lot of suffering, I'm good. And he instead allowed the Lord to use that suffering to really change the world. He did. And then Mother Teresa, what's so powerful about that is, I actually just recently watched a documentary on her, and once she set off for Ireland and then later, to India, I don't think she saw her mother. She saw her at the train station when she left for her to become a nun, and she never saw her again. And although she tried, the country that her mother was living in, I think it was Armenia, wouldn't allow her a visa. So for decades, she never saw her mother or her sister. And I got to think, like, this angst of going into the dark regions of the world to seek out the poorest of the poor. Again, she had that suffering that she was dealing with, where she wanted to see her mother and her sister couldn't. I think the Lord probably used that and said, like, just like you want to see your mother and your sister, so do I want all of these children with me, and I can't reach them. Will you do it? And it just fueled her. Her whole ministry just went nuclear. And you look at a lady like Mother Teresa, like, how did you start an order where it's literally on every continent around the globe, maybe with the exception of Antarctica, and that's just prayer, and she just doubled down on prayer. And I think that, again, not to sound like a broken record, but I'm coming to this conclusion, Sean, where prayer really is everything. I think people are like, well, I need to be out doing more social stuff. I need to be, going to more practices with my kids. I need to be doing, more trips, blah, blah, blah. And she just realized what I need to be doing is more prayer. And then from there, everything, fell in line. And JP2, all of his efficaciousness coming from prayer. Every single saint, they might look different, their mission might be different, but everything's consistent, that golden thread is just prayer and more prayer. I mean, that's going to transform the world. It works. Yeah.
Amen to that. And yeah, and I'm sure in your past you've gone into those dark places. And what helped you go into those dark places and come out the other side?
Yeah, there's definitely
Like
some.
I know me walking.
I stepped on you, Sean. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some countries there that I would never take my wife to. You know, like I call them like fourth world countries. You know, but I think part of that too is there's a mission. You know, and I think also realizing that we're only there for a short amount of time. You know, but Sam Blair is not going to change that situation by himself, but I think there's also this rhythm that also mirrors the church. Like there's saints come in, they're going to do, like if you look at history, all these saints, they did their piece, and then they don't live forever, and then they're like, all right, the Lord wants me to do this thing. This is my mission, and they do it, and they do it well, and they do it with the Lord. They collaborate with Him, and then we have to pick up the baton, and the church keeps moving forward. Mother Teresa did her part. JP2 did his part, but they didn't. The mission still continues, and I think seeing that cadence, realizing, okay, I have a piece to do. I'm going to do that piece well, and I'm not going to get cynical if the whole situation doesn't change on my watch or doesn't even change at all. But I'm going to be faithful to my mission, and things that are legal, moral, ethical, I'm going to do them well, and I'm going to be a good teammate, and then I'm going to go home, and I'm going to be the best husband I can be, and try and be the best father I can be, and just do my piece, fight my corner. And I think if we all had that mentality, I think we'd make a lot more traction, I would hope. Instead, I think we get riled up about everything in the news, and it's like, well, great, you're following all the news channels, but what are you doing?
Amen to that.
That rat race too, but yeah.
Well, and I talk about getting caught in the mud and miry of what's going on down here, where we want men to go here. Like our aim is heaven, and bring as many souls with us, right? That's the mission, as it were, to go and make disciples of all nations, and not to call out every little wrongdoing of those around us down below. It's and I know your buddy Jake. He likes movie references and stuff, and I've adopted the Galaxy Quest: never give up, never surrender. So we just don't have that choice. Kind of like Peter. Where else can we go?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can hang with the best of them when it comes to calling out critiques, this and this, but it's like that's not going to help anything. It's like, what am I going to do? And I think that's where first understanding that the Lord loves me, and being first and then doing, rather than critique. That's too easy, It's too easy to critique.
The priest this weekend challenged the men to put love out there, put love out in the world. Like, especially with the young people, encouraging them to do something. Like, so the young girl went home and unloaded the dishwasher as love for her mom. And, like those little acts of love that we can do as men for our family and our neighbors. You've got a single mom next door, mow her lawn. You got a young guy down the street that needs some encouragement. Just smile and ask him how his day's going. It doesn't take a lot to love someone.
I love it. And I think the other thing with that, Sean, I'm realizing that you have way more influence, at least I'm finding in my own home, way more influence loving and being patient with my wife and children than being grumpy and losing patience. Like a a loving man in the home has way more influence over his family than a grumpy one.
Amen to that. So, one of the segments I do, you said you're a father of three. You got a 9-year-old. Do you have a dad dish that you make that keeps the kids coming to the dinner table, or?
Yeah, I think we probably spoiled my kids early. At least my two older boys. I feel like they're going to turn into like a chicken tender. But one thing that I do is like a scramble. I'm big on the frying pan, Sean. I'll get all sorts of stuff going on.
Tell me you got cast iron.
Cast iron, yeah. Yep. So heat that thing up. Everything from steaks to stir fries to, yeah. I'll even do pasta dishes in the cast iron. Put some bacon in there and then throw some spaghetti, some cream. I don't know that it's necessarily the healthiest thing, but I love the cast iron. Yeah, so my wife keeps me at bay. She's like, I got it. Get out of here, But any chance I get, I'll use that cast iron.
Amen. I've got, I think I got a half dozen cast iron fry pans, and I got some Dutch ovens, and
yeah.
So they last forever. So what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Well, that's a great question. In terms of anything in specific, or
anything? What advice? You're sitting down with your 18-year-old self. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably be reflecting on that question well after this podcast. But what's coming to mind now is, from 18 to where I am today, there's been several instances where I'll get like, man, this is a trying situation. And every time, Sean, it gets worked out. And I look back, and the Lord's like, hey, I got it. I'm going to take it. Do you trust me? And now in reflection, I can kind of take a look at the rearview mirror, and every situation there has been worked out and come out smelling like roses, and the whole situation gets taken care of. And yet, to this date, there's still things I bump up against, like, here we go again. But I have to learn that lesson over and over. And I would just tell my 18-year-old self, really, God is good. You can trust Him. And everything will work out. Just don't lose your peace. Don't lose your peace.
That's awesome.
Now,
That's
too.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you keep in front of you, because it's so easy, especially in today's world, to lose that peace which the world's trying to take away from you. And so Jeff Cavins talks about riding with your posse. Who would be your go-to saints? Who are the ones that you walk or go into battle with?
So St. Joseph, St. Michael, they get the top two spots. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. John the Evangelist. I'm a big fan of St. Joan of Arc, and I think she's really special to our family. And then St. Therese of Lisieux.
Yeah, those are some pretty heavy hitters.
What about you?
I too walk with St. Joseph all the time, and St. Michael, patron of police officers. It's easier to go into those dark places when you have somebody like St. Michael and St. Joseph, terror of demons, watching your six. It's a lot easier knowing that they're with you, and those guys are kick butt kind of guys, and I've seen firsthand what they can do. I remember dealing with a guy. It was just a call for a drunk at a hotel, but I get there and he's falling down and getting back up and then babbling, fell down again, starts coming at me on all fours, barking like a dog, and then my backup showed up, but he was a young guy, had his taser out, and the guy fell for the third time, so I jumped on him so that he wouldn't hurt himself anymore, and gonna get my Mac 9, kill you, gonna get my Mac 9, kill you. And then he had these terror screams, and his legs were running, and then five alive, I need a five alive, and then gonna get my Mac 9, kill you. So, and my other backup showed up and was helping me and pulled out a great big 12-inch butcher knife out of the guy's coat pocket. And I started saying the St. Michael prayer. And the very instant I finished that prayer, the guy went limp. And we were able to get him to a hospital for medical attention. It was the worst case of crystal meth overdose that the hospital had ever seen. And I'm convinced had the other guy tasered him, he would have died in our custody. And just having St. Michael there to help out the situation was huge.
Wow. That's a good story, man. Yeah, firsthand right there.
Yeah, we are realizing that there are two forces in this world, and it's picking the winning side's important, or playing for the winning team.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to have a dram with friends. And I don't know if you know, but the Gaelic term for whiskey is Ishkabaha, which means water of life. And I pray that you continue to help lead many souls to the true water of life. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sean. God bless, man. Peace.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode of A Dram with Friends. Like and subscribe. Go to all podcast platforms to look for it on podcast, or go to godsquad.ca to support our mission.